A massive thank you to Skillshare for sponsoring today's video. Stick around for a special offer that will get you 2 months of Skillshare Premium for free. Without spoiling too much, there's a moment in John Wick 3 where a bunch of tough opponents storm the building John finds himself in. He's vastly outnumbered and outgunned, and so whenever he can catch a break in between waves, he heads to a safe zone to resupply. And while watching it, I couldn't help but think, this is pure video game action, it's a horde mode of sorts. But in considering how a video game adaptation of this scene would play out, to simply lift the sequence and pop it into a conventional wave-based framework would be clunky to say the least. It would look like any other cover shooter, either sacrificing the spectacle, the pitch-perfect direction of the film's action, or sacrificing your control over it all in favour of a more cinematic experience. And that's before you take into consideration the fact that while the action in these films is some of the best in blockbuster cinema, John Wick as a franchise is so much more than that, with a lore so deep and well delivered that it elevates these already borderline balletic scenes above simply two people punching each other, turning John Wick, even with Keanu Reeves' stony demeanour, into a rich character in a world full of similarly rich characters. All of which begs the question, is it actually possible to create a video game that captures all of this without resorting to tried and true video game tropes? I'll answer that after quickly telling you about today's sponsor, Skillshare. Skillshare is an online learning community with thousands of classes covering dozens of creative and entrepreneurial skills. Whether you want to fuel your curiosity, creativity, or even career, Skillshare is the perfect place to keep you learning and thriving. Premium membership gives you unlimited access, so you can join any of the classes and communities that suit your particular needs. Maybe you're thinking about creating your own rich cinematic franchise with pulse-pounding action. Then you might get a kick out of indie filmmaking, get the blockbuster look on a DIY budget, which will show you the basic steps you can take early on to save both money and more complicated work down the line. Speaking of saving money, Skillshare is also incredibly affordable. An annual subscription is less than $10 a month. And because Skillshare is sponsoring this video, you can sign up with my link in the description and get a 2-month free trial, so there's no risk to checking it out for yourself. And what's more, doing so really helps the channel as well. Thanks again to Skillshare for sponsoring the video, and now back to discussing the challenge of creating a video game that can capture the essence of John Wick without resorting to typical action game tropes. This is the challenge admirably taken on in the form of John Wick Hex by Bithell Games. Perhaps the team you'd least expect to tackle a franchise so gargantuan in scope, but also maybe one of the teams most equipped to experiment in representing the more abstract qualities of the franchise. And in doing so, they choose to slow things down, less Max Payne and more Hitman Go, where that franchise's identity is distilled to its tactical, almost board game-esque core. It's a move that may strike people as odd given the speed and impact of John's cinematic encounters, but in slowing things down to this degree and breaking down his moves to options from a menu, the game attempts to place players more concretely in the mind of John Wick. And when it works, when everything falls into place in just the right way, you'll find yourself not only performing the kinds of dazzling feats John is known for, in a way that might not be possible in a more conventional shooter, you find yourself thinking as John would, entering his same flow state that allows the film's action to glide as it does. At these points, it seems so natural to throw this guy so you can roll behind the other guy and throw him. You missed your shot on the next goon though, meaning you're low on ammo and the dude has his finger on the trigger. But then you realise that you're the Baba Yaga. Of course you can throw your gun hard enough to match any bullet, at which point you can take his gun and shoot everyone else. And it's at moments like these that you can look past the game's decidedly awkward animations and slow pace, because it doesn't feel slow here. You stop carefully analysing the situation and you just do. Similarly, the central timeline mechanic that allows you to measure your next action against your opponents becomes as much a means of characterization as it is a tactical tool. When all circumstances are equal, with both combatants holding the same weapon, you can be certain that John Wick is going to draw first because, well, he's John Wick. He's very good at this. The team understands that it's important to get across John's innate skill and manages to find a unique, subtle way of representing that without dialogue. You'll notice though that earlier I said this is all great when it works, which is to imply that as much as it genuinely pains me to say it, it rarely does. In fact, when those pieces don't fall in the right place, the game around them begins to come apart. But the unfortunate thing is that it's not for the team's lack of trying. In almost every element of the game's structure, you can absolutely see what they were going for. Each design decision captures a specific specific, crucial character trait of our hero are the encounters he finds himself a part of. It's where these systems intersect where problems start to arise. For example, each area is split up into around 6 or 7 sections, with each section roughly equal in size to a level in Hotline Miami. Not only does the slower, more tactical gameplay inherently exemplify John's ability to quickly analyse a room, the game forces you to take that same kind of care whatever action you choose. And that's because an important aspect of John's rampages, whether in the films or the game, is that he's not invincible. He's often ill-equipped to deal with the armies that stand before him, and so has to make use of whatever he can in the moment. And with that in mind, the decision was made to have your health and ammo persist until you make it through the entire area and defeat its boss. Every move taken, no matter how small, sticks with you as a result, and you'll always find yourself wondering if you could have done things more effectively, as you inevitably die time and time again because this game is surprisingly tough. And I can hear you now, this seems fine, just get better at remembering enemy positions in each area. But it's not as simple as that. Simply learning the best route through all the enemies in a level trial and error style would diminish John's propensity for improvisation, again, a vitally important aspect of his character. You want that feeling that John can't predict what's around the next corner, and so rather than presenting levels as a puzzle to solve with some kind of optimal solution, each level houses a certain number of enemies and, to an extent, their positions are randomized. This means you'll be in for a shock when the unarmed brawler you confronted near the start of a level suddenly turns into multiple goons with guns on your second attempt, and yet your health and ammo remain the same as they always were. As capable as John is, it's difficult in situations like this not to feel like you're totally boned, a scenario which, given the game's lack of checkpointing, feels all the more gut-wrenching knowing how much progress you're going to lose. Find yourself at the second to last area with no healing items, that the game is remarkably stingy with, by the way. Well, you should have thought about that. You can either keep banging your head against this wall, or choose to go all the way back and give the whole thing another shot. Again, you can see what they were going for, but in practice, Hex simply ends up too inconsistent to be a puzzler and too rigid to be an action game. It just sort of lies awkwardly in the middle. And while I touched on it earlier, I really need to take a moment to talk about these visuals, proudly, bafflingly showcased via the game's awful end-of-level replays, in which John will jerk from left to right as the movement system keeps him from walking in a straight line, before awkwardly standing in front of an enemy so that he can shoot them or throw them to the ground, at which point the woefully flat, repetitive animations will almost inevitably glitch out. It's stiff to the point of looking like a particularly broken game of the aforementioned Hitman Go. Not to mention the catastrophic framing of this action, with characters placed behind walls or pillars and the camera just flying about wildly, just to make sure that the cool sequence of events you enacted earlier is completely stripped of its joy. You'll be too busy wondering where the hell John even is. Obviously this is a game, it's its own thing, but part of the thrill of titles like this is that feeling of seeing how your playthrough would have looked to a passerby, that you just don't get when the game is breaking cinematic conventions as simple as the 180 rule. But even putting all these technical and mechanical problems to one side, there's still that part of me that finds it hard to envision a better way to get across what it would be like to step into the shoes of our hero. See, I don't think it would be very fun to be John Wick. Sure, there is a kind of catharsis to seeing a man consistently come out on top against such insurmountable odds and turning the criminal underworld of New York City into a cowering mess. And when you envision playing as John Wick in a video game, you're likely not thinking, I want to experience the noxious tension of barely scraping by in any given scenario. You want to unleash some Krav Maga on some unsuspecting fools. You want to live out that fantasy. But that fantasy doesn't define John. In fact, he rarely strikes me as a man with a plan as much as he simply enters that flow state I mentioned earlier. His fights are a constant cycle of committing to an action, then reacting to the consequences of that action. He's frantically attempting to pick the least bad option while in over his head. And yes, he may be the Baba Yaga, but there's only so much training you can do when you're staring down the barrels of multiple guns. And even when John relies purely on his own skill, he's bloodied and exhausted at the end of it all. In that sense, there's an argument to be made that Hex goes far deeper in its interpretation of the character than its mechanical and visual issues would let on. It captures the anxious, terrifying energy, that constant feeling that death could be around the next corner, that's presumably driving John through these situations. The difference is that in a film, the director gets to carefully control that tension and release, teetering on the knife edge of convincing the audience of a character's strength while consistently testing that strength to its absolute breaking point. Director Chad Stahelski and his crew know exactly how a scene is going to play out, where the actors will be, and how the camera is going to frame them. When control is handed to you as a player, however, you're the one turned into a director of sorts on a particularly disorganized set, trying to give your actor a list of detailed commands. Getting that scene down then, so to speak, is going to play out a lot like bungling a take on the movie set. You just keep repeating it until you get it right. The tension then almost inevitably begins to subside as the action descends into mere dice rolling. Randomized placement of enemies means you're just hoping that at some point you get the lucky combination. Doing well in Hex then rarely feels like you're living up to the capability of John's character, and more like you're just floundering around, stuck in your head about how the mechanics just might not be working for you on this run, rather than feeling any kind of excitement about actually inhabiting the character. At least if you were a director, you might get the gratification of knowing that every little piece will eventually come together to form an exhilarating end product that this game categorically fails to deliver on. All of this is to say that despite the team's best intentions, John Wick Hex is a stark lesson in the difficulties of adaptation, especially in the interactive realm. While the things it gets wrong do stick out, it's actually the many things it gets right that perhaps sting the most. The elements that show a deep understanding of John's character and the world he inhabits, that represent bold risk after bold risk taken by the small team, that are absolutely to be respected, that make you think that this is perhaps the only way you could effectively gamify one of my favourite film franchises that nevertheless I have no wish to actually play. And so I hope you enjoyed my piece on John Wick Hex. Thank you again to Skillshare for sponsoring the video and for the 2-month free trial you can access via the link in the description. I'd also like to thank my patrons, without whom this show simply would not be possible. As I'm sure you're aware, YouTube ain't exactly the steadiest platform right now, so every pledge really does help enormously. If you'd like to join the names on screen, maybe consider heading to patreon.com/writingongames and pledging even $1 or $2. Thank you all so much. Special thanks go to Mark B. Writing, Sivas, Artyom Vitsyuk, Milema Nides the Unwise, Hibi Amori, Rob, Bryce Snyder, Tommy Carver-Chaplin, David Björk, Lucas, Dallas Keane, William Fielder, my dad, Ali Al-Muhanna, Timothy Jones, Spike Jones, The Nameless Guy, Ham Migas, Samuel Pickens, Shardfire, Anna Pimentel, Jesse Ryan, Justin Holderness, Nicholas Ross, and Charlie Yang. And with that, this has been another episode of Writing on Games. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time.